Hello everybody, Josh here. Over the past several days, voices were raised across my country and around the world to protest the systematic oppression that Black Americans have faced for generations. The deaths of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, not to mention countless others in years past, are just the latest instances of police brutality as a tool of racial injustice. There's a sentiment I've seen expressed that politics don't belong in gaming. While there might be an argument to be made for escapism and the desire to get away from the problems of the world, avoiding politics does nothing but support the status quo. For many, the status quo is continued subjection to oppression, hate, and violence. I'm a middle-aged white guy in one of the whitest parts of the country, a few hours from any major cities. I'm privileged in that I have never needed to face what some of my friends, acquaintances, and RPG colleagues have faced and continue to face. But I hear their stories, and I can't, in good conscience, ignore them. Because I believe stories are important. They can show us perspectives that are otherwise foreign to us. The stories we tell to each other and to ourselves shape our view of the world and help us navigate its moral landscape. They help us explore and define our philosophical ideals and what we value. They can show us where we fall short of those ideals and maybe how to be better. We need to amplify and share the stories that are not being told. Listen to them and learn and be better. Thank you.
Hi everyone, welcome back to the Earthdawn Survival Guide, a podcast for novices and masters alike. I am, of course, Dan. My co-host is, of course, Josh.
Hello, everybody.
And on today's podcast, we'll be discussing all things hematological, bestial, selectional. You can tell where I pulled that one from today. But we actually have a couple of emails to get to real quick first. We've got two questions to answer as it is. But other than that, if you'd like us to answer your questions, because we know you all have some, we did a whole email podcast last time. Nothing but email palooza too. And if you want to get a hold of us, it's edsgpodcast@gmail.com. So today...
Before we get to the first email,
yes.
I do want to really quick address something that came up in the emails last time, because I was thinking about it and second-guessing myself. As I often do when I'm talking stuff here, it's mostly off the cuff, just kind of drawing off of my experience and knowledge. The question was about Swordmaster, and if you've got a Swordmaster that's focusing on using a two-handed weapon, they get second weapon as a discipline talent at 5th Circle, that doesn't really work for them, blah, blah, blah. I sort of off the cuff said, well, I would maybe drop second attack down to 5th Circle. I want to pull that back. I'm not actually sure that that's a great idea, because second attack is available. Like, anybody that gets it as a discipline talent much higher. And I'm not sure that it necessarily messes with game balance that much, but I think probably a better approach, and I can't believe that I really wasn't thinking about it at the time, is rather than going and juggling around the discipline talents so much, which really are supposed to be like sort of the defining characteristics, look at using the all talents to advance option, which is basically the original first edition one where you basically like choose a talent at each circle that you're going to advance. At that point, then you take, say, Spot Armor Flaw, I think was the one that I was like, take that as your optional talent at 5th Circle, but use the all talents to advance option and have that be the one that you are increasing. That you don't feel like you need to spend a whole lot of points on second weapon, which you're not really going to be using because of your chosen style, blah, blah, blah. If you're not using the all talents to advance option, talk to your game master.
Fair. Well, it was the question posed by Kagorsi. He wanted to know which, and I'm fairly certain, since he's written in twice and there is no bad blood between us, he will let us know if what you suggested is off the mark or not.
Yeah. I was more or less kind of initially thinking about it in the, well, okay, you need to change your discipline talent, but the other option is to use the original advancement scheme, which is the all talents to advance, and you just have second weapon and you're optional.
Yeah.
And you go from there. Because
Yeah,
really, swapping out discipline talents willy-nilly, if you want to do that at your own table, fine.
Have at it.
Have at it. I do think that taking that, kind of presenting that can be, I don't know, it can dilute some of the concept behind disciplines in the first place.
Fair.
That was just some especially while we were sort of mixing and re-listening to the episode to do the show notes and stuff. I was I'm not sure that that's such a good idea, actually.
So basically, the Troubadour episode hit you with one more thing piped in. The stairwell words got you.
Yes. So anyway, that was that. Again, I don't think it's fatal. If you want to do that stuff at your own table, fine. But it's probably not actually
the best idea.
The best way to go.
Fair. Anyway, so we've got a couple emails. We'll get to these real quick, and then we'll get on to the rest of the information we've got to present to you, which is off the cuff and pulled out of where. So Cosmit got us an email. He said, one of the upsides of the whole coronavirus is that he finally has time to catch up on the podcast. So thank you, Cosmit. You got a hold of us. He just finished the episode about Thrall, so he's a little behind everybody else.
That's fine.
He likes our chemistry. Thank you, Josh. Thank you, me. Is it possible we will tease Kratos the same way we did with Thrall?
If he's asking if we will do an episode about Kratos, yeah, probably at some point.
We're going to hit all the major geographical locations, and
we're trying, I think, early on to try and get through all of the disciplines and breaking that up with other things. But we'll probably cover Kratos at some point. I don't know where it is on the.
I don't have a clue.
on the
I've
schedule.
mapped out most of the first 40 episodes, and it might be in there somewhere.
Yes,
it probably is.
It would require, I think, both of us to actually go back to the book, because I haven't looked at the Kratos book in a while.
Mine is double a while, so I agree with you. Yeah, I would need to refresh my memory, and I've been doing that along the way, because it's one of those. Mm-hmm. The information you think you know, and then you go back to the book and go, oh right, I forgot about that. And that's what I do, is I'm like, right, take notes and tell the listeners. And that's what I do. So, yes, Cosmit will get to Kratos eventually. Promise.
Cosmit is one of our Polish fans.
Oh, cool.
He was actually the one that organized my trip to Poland last year.
Nice. Thank you for getting Josh there and back safely.
Yeah, he's one of the head, was one of the folks in charge of Orichalcum, which is their Earthdawn focused convention.
Nice. Welcome to it, and I hope you're enjoying 4th edition. The rest of us. Brian, meanwhile, has a sticking point, I think, or a point to make about the episode we did about elves, where he says, you can have both. With their lifespans, an elven couple can have one child, raise it, send it out, and then have another. So hence, as a human in your lifespan, you would only see a single-child families. So he's countering the idea of having elves only having one child and the dwindling population to extinction.
Yeah, so. I can see that. I don't basically you're saying, oh, they only have one child at a time, and when the child reaches adulthood at around age 20 or whatever, then the couple might have another one. That's still with their longer lifespans, it might not be a huge deal.
Yeah, fair.
And that's fair. I don't really have anything to object to that statement. It just still seems to me to be kind of a little bit weird.
Fair. But we're talking about elves, and they're always a little bit weird, so
yeah,
I'm just teasing. So thank you, folks, for your emails. We'll obviously handle as many as we can possibly get and get more down the line. So maybe we'll do another email palooza episode. So we'll see how those
many we get.
Exactly. So again, if you want to get a hold of us, it's edsgpodcast@gmail.com. Next up is kind of a topic that I don't think I've heard discussed a lot about in any other place. Is I think we should talk about blood magic, just because it's another way to power all the things that are going on around you. So it's not always just threads, and it's not always just innate horror powers or your talents just naturally imbuing themselves with you. Blood magic is a huge thing in Earthdawn, and it's not necessarily evil or twisted. So let's dispel that right there.
It can be. he says, looking northward on the map at the gigantic blood-corrupted forest.
Well, there is that.
Yeah, I don't know. It's a weird day, folks. We're like getting into summer up here, and it's kind of humid. And anyway, my brain is a little bit melty today.
No, it's okay. So
That's okay.
Blood magic doesn't really differ from thread magic, other than the fact, I mean, it's just another power source, essentially.
Yeah, and one that, in theory at least, anybody can tap into.
Mm-hmm.
You don't, unlike thread magic, which you pretty much need to be an adept to take advantage of.
Yes.
Blood magic is something that, at least in theory, is available to anybody because of the life, the power, the energy that is inherent in blood is something that all name givers have and can therefore draw on it.
Yeah.
Generally speaking, it makes people nervous, and I think rightfully so.
Mm-hmm.
At least when you're talking about the common people.
Yeah.
Just because usually by the time you're throwing blood enchantments around,
you kind of tapped out everything else.
Yeah, it's
a little scarification, some cutters out there, little stuff like that.
Yeah, it's I think that there is a legacy in Bar Save and perhaps the wider world to an extent of, in some cases, when there was not sufficient magical power, whether through true elements in Orichalcum and the rites of protection in passage and so forth, or people who only got fragments of them or something along those lines, to try and power the defenses of the kaer with blood magic, with sacrifice magic, basically, where people are giving their lives in order to keep others alive. And there's a very, like, Shirley Jackson, what's the name of that story by her? I don't remember now. Somebody, I'm sure, will write in. But it's the Shirley Jackson wrote a short story. That's the one that has, like, where everybody is pulling the marbles out, and the
lottery?
one who that's the one. The lottery. Yes, that's the name of it. See, I knew we would get there.
Yeah, one of us knows it.
That there's that kind of feeling where like people are dying in order to let others live, and while from one point of view that is a noble thing, I think the circumstances and the power disparities and stuff that, like political power disparities that perhaps sometimes came up around that, resulted in some rather problematic situations, and people might not want to be remembered of that so much.
Fair.
Yeah, that sense mostly made sense.
Yeah. I
reminded of that. That's reminded, not remembered.
Fair. I always, since the 3rd edition covers, Player's Guide, Game Master's Guide, were Aztec, Mayan, ancient civilization, Mesoamerican.
Kind of,
thank you. Good word. I am always remembering that the human sacrifices that went on in those cultures to their gods.
Right.
So I know that since the 1st edition of Earthdawn, blood magic has been a thing. Not just blood pebble, but blood promises, blood oaths, and things like that. And so, again, it's the last resort, and sometimes there's the blood curse at the end. It's the dying act, drawing blood. I curse this, and so to happen. And that is a wonderful thing to pull out. My game group has rarely ever used blood magic in the last 25 years. Yeah,
so the things that I typically see happen in with blood magic are blood charms, including living armor like Blood Pebble most frequently, but also...
Yes.
Also...
Blood Knuckles.
Well, Blood Knuckles, that was added a little bit later, but, basically like blood charms like Desperate Spell, Desperate Blow, some of the...
Absorb Blow.
Absorb Blow is another one.
Yeah.
But like those blood charms, the couple of the magic, aka living armors that are blood powered, like Blood Pebble armor, Living Crystal being the other sort of big one. And the blood magic damage that's required because of the oath you swear to form a group true pattern.
Yeah.
That's the other one because of the blood oath that's required in order to create that true pattern that then the members of the group can draw on and take part in.
Yeah.
And those are the big ones. I think part of the situation, and looking back kind of on the history of the development and where things were, is that blood magic kind of loomed large in Earthdawn's collective thing as a result of its connections to Shadowrun and the blood magic of As Technology, the corporation. Yes. Of the evil corporations,
yes,
probably considered among the most evil because of the blood magic. Yes. Yeah, and so that kind of echoed in, and other than the blood magic charms and the oaths and so forth, there really wasn't a lot of opportunity for player characters to use blood magic. There were like a couple of options in the books, and I seem to recall talking to Morgan at this point while we were doing some of the development for 4th edition as we were kind of wrapping things up on the player's guide, and that the numbers, like the bonuses that you would get for pushing yourself, like the benefit that you would get for, say, pushing yourself to take a blood wound or something, seemed a little bit out of, like, the bonus that you got seemed a little bit underpowered compared to like the cost that you were paying to get it.
Fair.
And I don't know, just in general, it's like blood magic, generally speaking, aside from the blood oaths and the blood charms, seems to largely end up being the domain of, this is how you know that certain people are bad guys, that they are evil. Anybody who has been keeping up with the Legends of Earthdawn podcast, one of the storylines that's kind of going on in that is my character Virag kind of tracking down information about Palinthrax, who is another Mancer who lived in Parlength, and had a spell that I learned called Palinthrax's Siphon, where basically you deal damage to a person, whether that is yourself or another target. Yeah. And that power, and it's basically does damage to them. It's basically is like a blood magic spell that does damage to them, and it provides you with a bonus in order to a subsequent spell casting or something that you might do after. And like, it's cool. It's creepy. It was required in order for us to open the door to Palinthrax's tower. Yeah. I ended up wounding myself in order to open the door so we could all get in.
What? Another Mancer's spell is kind of creepy? No, yeah. The hell you say?
You look at the upcoming Iopos source book, and a big, like, one of the reveals there, and some of the stuff that's in that book is
spoilers.
The flesh forges, the thrice forged something. I forget the exact term right now, but like that Uhl and the Denerastus like take people and put them in, like, hide them away down deep underground and perform nasty experiments and transformative things on them, and there are abominations and things like that come out of it. And it's like, just in general, like,
ew.
Yeah.
So that covers kind of like a game mastery aspect of where blood magic can come into play as far as a story or plot point's concerned. Let's kind of head down for the players real quick, what they can actually do with blood magic and so forth.
Well, we talked about blood charms. We talked about the living armors that use blood magic damage, basically.
Yeah.
We talked about the oaths. We talked about the group pattern. Like, all of that is stuff that is fairly well accepted and useful for the most part for players, though you do kind of run into the idea of you've only got so much health, you only got only so much in your death rating, and that permanently reduces them.
I was about to say, let's go to the mechanics real quick, which is if you take, say, 4 or 5 points of blood magic, depending upon your charms and or armor and whatnot, then your death rating and your unconsciousness automatically go down to that level, that same amount. So now we're getting unconsciousness is 5 points quicker.
Right. Basically it's a matter of, is the cost that you are paying worth the benefit? And I think at lower circles, it's a tough call because you don't have a whole lot of health. But as you get up into higher circles, particularly once you get into journeyman tier, especially if you are a more combat-focused character and have the higher durability, then having a Desperate Blow Charm or a Desperate Spell Charm, or if you don't have something better, I think probably that Blood Pebble armor is one of the most all-around useful armors in the game.
It is. Everybody craves it.
It's incredibly popular because it's got a nice balance between armor protective rating with 5 physical and 3 mystic and only 1 initiative penalty.
Yes.
You are in it all the time, so you never get caught out of your armor, which is always a valuable consideration.
Yes.
And I think it does 5 blood magic.
I want to say it's 4, but
maybe 4.
I don't know.
I mean, it does. I think it does less damage. I think it does less blood magic damage than it actually does in physical armor.
Yeah.
Only because that seems to make sense. But so yeah, it's really nice. Living Crystal is like Blood Pebble on steroids, except for the problem that it is, I think, initiative penalty 2 and doesn't, I think, provide quite enough of a like additional armor, at least in most considerations, to have that be worthwhile. And then there's the options that...
Yeah, Blood Pebble takes 4 blood magic damage.
Yep.
I have enough characters. I should have memorized that one a while ago. I just wanted to be double sure.
That's okay.
Yeah. But other blood charms that you can get.
Desperate Blow and Desperate Spell are like really, really worth having.
Oh, totally.
You know, it's basically it's a one-time shot of +6 to an attack or damage test.
Yep.
And generally speaking, I am of the opinion that it is better to put that towards the damage or effect test of a spell rather than try to boost the to hit. Yeah. Because while the to hit, if you do well enough on the hit on the attack test, you'll do bonus damage. You need to get basically 3 extra successes on the attack test. So like +15 over the target number to do the equivalent of the +6 damage that the Desperate Blow Charm does if you were to just use it on the damage in the first place. Now, admittedly, if you are in a situation where you are having a really hard time hitting, it might be worthwhile spending it to try and at least get the hit in the first place, because the extra damage is going to do you a darn bit of good if you can't hit the thing in the first place.
Exactly.
But I almost always, for Virag, I have a Desperate Spell Charm, and I cannot remember a time when I did not use it for effect.
Yes. Other things to get that I think are also good blood charms to have: a Horror Fend, the Initiative Booster, the Strength Booster if you want to. Yeah, I haven't had anybody ever pick up a Targeting Eye because they just have that whole creepy thing of, I don't want my eyeball getting, eaten by a worm and all that. They just don't like that. But other than that, I mean, there's a whole bunch of Death Cheat charms are fantastic. So
yeah, Death Cheat can be nice, especially if you don't have, I don't know, Death Cheat where unless you're having a hard time getting Last Chance salves. Yes. I mean, the advantage to a Death Cheat charm is that you don't need to worry about somebody getting the Last Chance salve onto you. It just happens, or it doesn't.
Just is there.
Or, Neithermancer with their CPR, like, last... I am
spell.
So blanking at everything. Last Chance? I think it's called Last Chance.
I think it is called Last Chance, because they have that similar title to most things. But yeah, and there's almost half of my players that have ever had a fighter type of any kind always get 1, if not 2, Absorb Blow charms. Yeah, absorb blow can be nice if you're going to be a frontline fighter, because that's something that basically you can activate to give yourself additional like protection similar to like armor and whatnot. I got a guy who's basically a pugilist type or a gauntlet type, because originally we did this whole mystic warrior thing from the Earthdawn journal. Yeah, he's got 2 of those, which is 12 points apiece. So you can turn those on, and that's 24 points of damage he can take before he's slowed down, on the way to doing what he has to do as a frontline fighter. So there was one of those. But, so yeah, that's just blood magic in general. I can't say everyday use for players, but that's at least the most familiarity they're going to have with what blood magic and its applications can actually do on the player's side, because then you can get down to things like blood wounds take a year and a day to heal, so careful entering into those contracts. Right. You get blood oaths, which if you want an example of a blood oath from a movie, I saw The Mask of Zorro recently. He cuts his hand, swears an oath he will avenge his brother's killer. If you go back to Robin Hood with Kevin Costner, same thing. He swears an oath that he'll avenge his father's killer. It's not really with anybody else, but it's still...
Yeah, those, interestingly enough, while it would make a lot of sense for, like, that seems like it is something that should be modeled in Earthdawn.
Mm-hmm.
It's not. The examples of blood oaths are all like you are swearing an oath with someone.
Yes.
Like you and another person.
Mm-hmm.
You know, more like a blood brothers kind of
pinky,
notion.
It's a pinky promise. So,
yeah, it's a really deep pinky promise. It's a pinky swear on steroids.
Yes.
But yeah, there's no...
Or an open wound.
There actually isn't really any example now that I think about it, even kind of thinking back to older stuff of, you know, like where you just as an individual, like spill some blood and swear an oath to perform some task and get any kind of benefit out of it.
Yeah.
I think that is something that perhaps individuals might do.
Mm-hmm. But
yeah, no, just a solo sort of blood oath like that actually is not something that's in the rules at all.
We'll save that for 5th edition. So,
or for an upcoming book if we can find some way to make it not. I mean, there sort of was like sort of the. And I took a look in the PDF of the player's guide while we were kind of talking here, and the stuff that I remember about like pushing yourself and whatnot is not something that's in the player's guide. And I think it was because we found that the benefit that it provided for what you were taking, especially in comparison to other stuff that you could do, was just not really worth it anymore. And so it got pulled possibly with the thought of maybe if we can find a way to make it work, bringing it back at some point. But
yeah, at the moment it's kind of shelved.
No promises.
No blood promises either. So, so yeah, we've got the blood oath, which is like a promise between two characters, and they get a bonus out of that. And then there's the blood peace, which is a truce sworn between two characters, kind of for the same reason, which is this bond we now have is a promise that we will not do something.
Yeah.
And yeah, never harm one another or allow harm to come to another through inaction. So it's just one of those, like you said, it's kind of the Blood Brothers promise that goes back generations for us humans here. And it's always like, a +2. It's pretty simple enough. It's not too bad. So it's just there. It's a fantastic way to do something in a story. And I did have 2 characters. Oddly enough, I have 2 players named Marcus and 2 players named Dave. So my 2 players, both named Marcus, spelled differently, thankfully, their characters ended up swearing a blood promise because one saved the other one's life, and the other one made a promise, I will repay the debt, and that lasted a year and a day. So it was just one of those. Yeah, it was a wonderful storyline to have. They both hated the fact they already had a wound, and so any second wound they ever got in combat took them down a step. They're like, God, when does this thing go away? And so I had to keep track on a calendar when it went away. They were very happy to write that wound off on their sheet, though, I'll tell you that. It was almost like whiteout. But yeah, it's a fantastic little story wrinkle to have in there if you want, as a game master, to just kind of tug on that every once in a while and use it. And then we get down to blood sworn oaths.
That is the super duper, like,
we ain't kidding around.
That is a lifetime oath between 2 people, and it does provide some decent benefits. Like, it provides additional attribute values to 2 different attributes that don't count towards the normal limits for raising them. It gives you a unique talent that it basically works like the blood share talent for cavalrymen. Allowing the people who are sworn to share damage back and forth. It gives bonus to if you have the thought link or empathic sense talents to use those with your blood sworn companion. And it's possible using that to potentially, if one member of the sworn pair dies, the other one can try and actually bring them back from the dead.
Yeah. So again, fantastic story wrinkle. Would be great in an Earthdawn novel.
Yeah.
Anything upcoming. But it's one of those, again, if you can somehow get your players committed enough to work that together, it's a fantastic little storyline wrinkle to have in somebody's character background or between two of the characters you're playing with, and they somehow get that figured out. Yeah. So Because I have a feeling somewhere along the line in my group, someone's going to be taking this blood sworn oath because they've been playing together this long. The characters have known each other almost that long, and they've already had one promise between them. So I have a feeling it's going to develop here soon. So it's not. It takes a while to get there. You know, I have to have 3 calendar years of the characters knowing each other to be able to develop this bond and swear that oath. But it's kind of badass.
It can be, yeah, absolutely.
So I'm all in favor of it. Any further thoughts on blood magic? Because that kind of hits all the high points we needed to. Yeah, fair enough. We're going to hit 3 topics tonight. So if you have any questions about blood magic, or we did not cover anything, it's clearly laid out in the 4th edition. It's like 3 or 4 pages long. It's not a lot, but it's a nice wrinkle to throw in. I forget if 4th edition covers the depatterning or not.
I'm not really a fan of depatterning.
Fair. Okay. We will ignore that.
It got introduced in the Theron Empire book because the Theron Empire book introduced some really out there blood charms. Mm-hmm. And Earthdawn 2nd edition kind of leaned into it a little bit more. I'm not crazy about it as an idea, and so we don't have it.
Okay. No worries. Nothing big there. So we've covered that up. You just wash your hands of that. Wash the blood off your hands of that. So a little punchy here tonight. If you have any questions for us about blood magic, by all means send them in. But I think that kind of covers everything. Like I said, it's a wonderful little storyline to have if you can work it in somehow. I just ran a pre-gen adventure where characters had to come across a small little Tiskrang village who wanted to be kept separate from the rest of the world, and there were Therans on a hunting party out there. So if you came across the party, if you came across the little Tiskrang village, they wanted you to swear a blood oath that you would not reveal the location of their village. And that was it. So character had to sign up for that, take the blood oath, done, go, see ya. That was it. And it lasts a year and a day. So there you are. So it is in 1 or 2 of the pre-published adventures. And again, if you can work it in somehow, not a bad thing to do.
I think one of the things, actually, now that you kind of talk about that, I think that the tendency... Never mind. I don't know where I was going.
Okay.
All right.
Absolutely no worries.
What's next?
So, on to our next one, which is... So that was all things hematological. This is going to be all things bestial. So, monsters and creatures. We haven't actually talked about using them, picking them, the designs of them. We hit on a little bit on how to balance them for your party.
Yeah, we talked about that a little bit in the last episode, kind of in response to an email question.
Yeah, and I found out exactly how hidden those rules were from me because I found the book they were in. I found my highlighting of them. I'm like, oh yeah, I never used these because it was in the boxed bar save campaign set in the Game Master's book. Really hard to find. If you didn't have the box sets, you never used them, and they were so
my
so
thought
well hidden.
It was either my thought is that I would have either been in the booklet that came with the GM screen, or that it would have been in the Game Master's book for the bar save box set. Those would have been the 2 places that I would have.
It was in the Game Master's book,
possibly the companion, but I didn't think so.
I did check there first.
It might have been reiterated in the Creatures of Barsave book, but I don't think so there either. I think that one focused more on the system that they had for determining how many legend points a creature was worth.
Yes, and making up your own creatures at that point.
Yes.
So I did check all 3 or 4 of those books that you mentioned, and yes, it was in the Game Master's guide in the Barsave campaign boxed set. So if you didn't pick up the box set, you never had this. So you're right. It was in the wrong place. It was a little too hard to find.
Well, I don't think that's necessarily the wrong place.
Not your words, my words.
You know, having worked on design and making books and knowing that there are only so many pages and you need to find space to cut stuff.
Yes.
It was probably a case of either that it wasn't something that they realized would have been handy right out of the gate, and so it got developed later and then added to a very early book, or it was just something that they needed to cut space for the book and decided that would be better served moved to another place.
Fair.
Or something else entirely. I don't know.
Never know. Anyway, so with Josh's guidance, it has been put in the proper place in the 4th edition Game Master's Guide right before all the stat blocks we're about to talk about. So
yes.
It's a wonderful little chart to use on how to balance your party, but we're just going to talk about the overall genesis behind the monsters and creatures in the Game Master's book. And then there's more in supplemental books as well. But it's one of those, how do you pick which ones to throw into your campaign as a Game Master? And then exactly, where do half of these creatures come from? Are they legend, or are they just horrific manifestations of creatures that already exist now? Because sometimes the horrors did their thing during the Scourge, and now we have what's floating around right now.
A little bit of everything. I mean, if you go through, you will find plenty of examples of just normal animals.
Yeah, rats, rhinos, horses,
apes,
elephants,
cheetahs, wolves, stuff like that. So there are plenty of just normal wildlife, horses and dogs and stuff like that. You've got some of the typical sort of fantasy
mythological
versions.
Creatures.
Well, yeah, you've got mythological creatures. The Earthdawn version of harpies and basilisk and
manticore,
chimera and manticore
griffins,
and hellhound and stuff like that.
All those from legend.
And then and so those in many cases often have a little bit of an Earthdawn twist on them, something that's a little bit different that makes them stand out a little bit, especially when you get sort of into the realm of undead, like cadavermen and ghouls, both of which are different enough from their stereotypical fantasy game
counterparts
that it's always fun to drop ghouls against new players for the first time, when they might be expecting sort of the paralysis ability of a ghoul that's common to D&D games. And no, they just have damage that messes you up and does damage.
Yes.
Or the cadaver men where they're just zombies, and then you hit them, and then they get angrier and hit you harder.
And more often.
And then, so you've got your standard creatures, you've got your, basically equivalents of the common kind of fantasy game creatures that you would expect to find in any kind of monster book. And then you do get some of the more
unique,
unusual ones.
Yes.
Like the Gatehound that drains magic.
Yeah.
And the as I'm flipping through the book here, the Jub, which is basically the giant flesh-eating frog with fangs.
Yes.
The krill worm, the lightning lizard, things
the krill
like that.
Ra, which is the
krill ra, which is the giant,
stage, yeah.
The case of huge sexual dimorphism in a creature. But so just generally, we had talked last time about, in the book, all of the creatures are sort of marked with a challenge value, which gives a tier, novice, journeyman, etc., and an approximate sort of equivalent circle.
Yeah.
And that is a good starting point. You really need to look at what your group is capable of, what kind of abilities and such that they can bring to bear physically, magically, and whatnot, and kind of compare the numbers like we talked last week to gauge whether a creature is how much of a challenge it's going to be.
Yeah.
Generally speaking, just because of the way that the action economy works, and that basically, barring certain cases, there's a lot of creatures don't get to do stuff outside of their turn.
Yeah.
One of the things that Morgan did when he was reworking and kind of tweaking a lot of the creatures was to try and lower the amount of dice rolling and tracking stuff that the game master would need to do, because it's relatively easy for a player to keep track of all the stuff for their character because they only have to deal with one. And so the amount of complexity that can exist for a player character can be a little bit higher. But when you try and do that complexity with game master characters, you run into a couple of problems. One, you don't get as a game master, you don't generally get the familiarity with all of the tricks and synergies and whatnot that the abilities and powers and so forth can have.
Yeah.
You frequently, just to manage things when you've got multiple creatures and whatnot, tend to fall back on just a couple of things. So consequently, even though the numbers might be even or stuff like that, it can be difficult, and you just you have it for an encounter. You don't have it for multiple encounters, multiple sessions, and things like that, the way you do
Yeah,
a PC. So
you don't live with it as long as the players live with their characters.
And so I don't think that, unless you're talking about a recurring Game Master character that's going to be a long-running rival or ally or something along those lines, that is going to be...
these is turned into somebody's pet.
Yeah, that's popped up multiple times. You don't need the complexity for creature opposition for creatures that you do for player characters. And so there was an attempt, the success of which was certainly up for a matter of personal taste, to try and, especially as we got further along in the design process and some of the stuff added in the companion and creatures added in later books, to like reduce the amount of stuff that the Game Master has to actively keep track of when using the creature in combat.
Yeah.
That basically a lot of their, what used to be for creatures that are returning from previous editions, rather than having a separate ability to roll, a lot of times that their special stuff gets triggered off of rolling well enough on an attack test, for example.
Yeah.
Like a lot of creatures with poison, that, especially as we went along, in order for the poison to actually affect the target, they need to get an extra success on the attack test, and rather than do extra damage with that, then they can inject poison or whatever. So that's something that was kind of one of the design goals that developed over the course of working on things.
And looking at the creature section, I noticed that at least in 4th edition, and I'm not very familiar with a lot of previous ones, but these are some new maneuvers that the creatures have. I don't recall being in previous editions.
Yeah, this was something that grew out of the ability, basically that the extra successes, the extra success mechanic that by default was sort of like, oh, well, it'll just like each extra success will do extra damage to overcome armor, blah, blah, blah. And then kind of realizing that, well, maybe we can actually have the option to spend those extra successes to do other things. Like, for example, flying creatures. If you hit them well enough, you can damage their wings and prevent them from flying. If a character is grappled or ensnared by a creature, you can spend extra successes to try and help them break free. Like to like that whole introducing special maneuvers.
Yes.
Which can be learned through appropriate knowledge skills, or creature analysis can allow you to unlock certain maneuvers, basically become aware that they're a possibility, is just something that kind of grew out of, it's kind of a bit of tactical complexity that does not, in a lot of cases, require breaking out the battle map and minis.
Fair.
Because that was another thing, partly because I tend to play Theater of the Mind. I tend to prefer doing that and being a little bit more fast and loose with ranges and stuff like that. Yeah. And, judging that it's sort of good enough. I certainly have done my share of minis gaming and whatnot over the years, and I just got a little tired of it. I mean, if that's your bag, that's fine. I know some people really, really like going into that sort of like crunchy tactical complexity tabletop minis style gaming. Yeah, I think that the special maneuvers and stuff add that kind of tactical complexity without necessarily requiring the battle map scenario.
Fair. So of the common maneuvers, I count 11 for the creatures and monsters to use. So new things, like I said, I've never heard of before, like clip the wing.
Well, that's an ability that a player character can use against a flying creature, basically. The other actual thing that some of those grew out of was like there are several creatures that have like a kind of grappling or ensnaring effect. Yeah. They're and snakes. So like snakes and stuff like that, where we wanted to standardize the way that those worked. And so, okay, here is how this, basically like the ambush predators, like will jump from ambush and they will like pounce on the target and that will have a certain effect. Yes. Regardless of whether it's a jungle cat or some other creature that we make up. But basically here is the standard rule for how that ability, that power works.
Yes.
And so that basically got just kind of standardized and listed at the beginning because there were a bunch of creatures that had it. And so rather than repeat 8 lines of text or 5 lines of text or however many it was, every time that power, every time that power came up, we write the rules up once and then just list the name of the maneuver when it pops up for a creature. And so then you can just go and refer to that at the beginning.
Yeah. So for the listeners who don't have their books handy, if you've not gotten to this point in the Game Master's Guide, it is Clip the Wing, Crack the Shell, Defang, Enrage, Grab and Bite, Hamstring, Overrun, Pounce, Provoke, Pry Loose, and Squeeze the Life.
Yep. All pretty straightforward. Clip the Wing we talked about with the flying. Crack the Shell is the one that is like you basically spend extra successes on your attack to reduce. You're cracking the shell of the crab. You're like basically reducing their armor, allowing you to do more damage on subsequent rounds.
Gotcha. So when it says spend extra successes, that's the thing I think the listeners need to clarify.
Okay, yeah. So let's say, well, let's grab one. The cave crab, I think, is a great example.
I've always loved
because the cave crab has cracked the shell, okay?
And they're huge,
and they're huge and powerful. Cave crab has a physical defense of 10 and a physical armor of 18.
Yes.
So they are big and nasty. They have cracked the shell. If you roll a 10, between a 10 and a 14, then you just hit it normally, you roll damage normally, and it probably gets absorbed by its armor.
Yeah, all 18 points of it.
If you roll a 15 to a 19, okay, so at that point you've got 1 success from the actual basic hit.
Yep.
A second success because you've got 5 or more but less than 10.
Yes.
You have the option of, let me just flip back to the
Crack the shell.
Here real quick. Crack
they
the shell.
spend extra successes from physical attacks to reduce the creature's physical armor by 1 per success spent.
So rather than doing an additional +2 damage for that extra success, which is sort of the default when you hit, you can say, rather than doing +2 extra damage, I'm going to roll my normal damage, but after this attack, its armor is reduced from 18 to 17.
Yes. And so for every subsequent success you get,
and that lasts, and so if you rolled really well, if you roll a 25, okay, so you've got 15 over, you've got 3 extra successes.
Yes.
You can put all of those to cracking the shell and reducing its physical armor down to 15.
Gotcha.
Which not only, like, it doesn't help you on that one hit, but everybody else that's going to be hitting it is going to be taking advantage of that.
Yes.
Now, on the plus side, on the flip side of that, Cave Crab has big nasty claws, and they can do the same to you because they have Armor Cutter, which is basically crack the shell, but for the creature.
Yeah.
Where it basically reduces the armor by, they can spend extra successes in that regard. And they also have Squeeze the Life. They've got Squeeze the Life, which means that they can grab you in their claw and start crushing you. And then Pry Loose basically allows your friends to try and break you loose. So they are things that mechanically allow like an interaction with something that they do.
Yeah.
And if they don't go, then, if they don't roll well enough, then it doesn't trigger off and you don't really need to worry about it. But generally, it's a tactics. It's a, like, they kind of indicate the way that the creature would fight, that you look at the Krogen, for example.
Yes.
Another like nasty creature. But they've got Pounce, right? They've got Great Leap, they've got Pounce, they've got Stealthy Stride. They are ambush predators.
Yes.
Like basically that they fight by, that they basically strike from stealth and their tactic is to do a lot of damage on that initial attack because their plan is to basically take down whatever it is that they're going after right out of the gate.
Yes.
As an ambush predator, as opposed to wolves, for example, which will have like pack tactics type abilities.
Yes.
That will, like, they can benefit each other and
swarm their prey. Yeah,
like standard wolf gets hamstring and, opening and things like that allow them to, to basically harry and cause problems against their target by working together as a group.
Yeah.
So you get some of that stuff, and then, some of the more difficult like, and troublesome things. Initially, it was, okay, these are things that they should do, like the Thunder Beast's trample, like things like that, which was just like, these are things that a bunch of creatures have or will have in the future. Here's the standard way that works.
Yes.
Boom. And I think as development went on, we came up with more of, basically using special maneuvers as a way to, if anybody has seen Morgan's work on like his blog and stuff of statting up adepts as creatures.
Yes.
And giving them, like, rather than listing all of their talents and having the game master kind of keep track of them, especially if you're looking for relatively disposable, like they're only going to show up once.
Yes.
They will have special maneuvers or powers that will effectively duplicate sort of the ability of those. They will have maybe a higher physical defense if it's a warrior, because it's assumed that they will be doing this sort of thing, or that their initiative will be higher because that's what Tiger Spring does. And so it'll be built right in, rather than having the game master kind of need to keep track of the strain and everything associated with that.
Fair. And I also love the fact that these are things that the creatures can do. And a lot of the creatures in this section can be animal companions to a Beastmaster. And so their abilities are already laid out for the Beastmaster to understand how they work.
Right.
So I find that a benefit as well. So we've got the different kinds of creatures you get, which are, some are based upon old mythology. Some are based upon just little Earthdawn type tweaks to what you would normally expect out of a fantasy setting or a medieval type setting. And then they have the completely unique Earthdawn creatures that are there. And now we've listed out in 4th edition all of the special maneuvers that they can do for benefit of the Beastmaster to actually know what their new animal companions can actually take care of for them. So here's your secondary character.
Or the benefit of the game master to make life difficult for the player characters.
What? No, that's not what we're here for. But yeah, all of that is now put in there, and this is new to 4th edition. All those creature maneuvers that we were just talking about. So, and that's what we're here for, of course, is 4th edition. But that is a wonderful little wrinkle. But now the kicker is the whole thing that we kind of started with at the beginning of this piece, which is, how do you choose? I understand the novice tier, the journeyman tier, and so forth. How do you actually go through and choose which creatures you want to throw in there? I tend to go with what's geographically safe. Hey, you're in a swamp. I'm not going to throw in a forest creature or something that lives high in the mountains. Not quite the same. If I'm, up on a mountainous peak, like we were talking about Terror in the Skies earlier, I'm not going to take something that's, an aquatic creature and throw it up there at you. It's not going to work that way. So I tend to think geographically first. And then secondly, since I've run a lot of the pre-gen adventures and they use a lot of the same creatures, the Spagra completely, Cadavermen endlessly, things like that. So I try to go, what's something I have not used yet?
Yeah.
And I kind of go off the ball. Yeah, it's the same level. I can kind of modify the numbers now that I have the chart. So what's something I've never used before? Let's throw something new at my players. So.
Yeah. I mean, that's basically it. How do you choose? Well, you look at the things that are available that are an approximate, roughly that same level. And Morgan, again, at his blog, Panda Gaming Grove, has like lists of all of the creatures from 4th edition sorted out by challenge rating and by habitat.
Love Morgan for that.
So he's got lists of, like, you can look at the list of, here are all the forest creatures, here are all the plains creatures. Like, he's got that stuff already collated, so you can grab that. Great handy reference. And like pick something that is appropriate to the area, something of the appropriate challenge level, and go from there. Or if there's a creature that you really like that you want to use that might not be necessarily appropriate to the
level
environment, come up with the reason why it's not.
Exactly. Make it part of the storyline. Why is this thing here? It shouldn't be here. Figure that out. Make that part of the mystery.
So basically it's like, use what you want to use that seems kind of interesting, that might provide something a little cool, and just make sure, using the comparison guidelines to get a sense of how much of a challenge that it is or is not going to be for your group. And it is perfectly okay.
Yeah.
In fact, I give you permission to use creatures that are not an equal challenge. And by that, I mean, both things that might be a little bit tougher
Yeah.
and things that are easier. I think there is a tendency with crunchier style games in the past 15, 20 years to try and strike this I think false sense of balance where you are always looking for an encounter, a combat encounter, to always be balanced.
Yeah.
That it is always supposed to be a challenge,
or something that they can always win.
Well, yes, but in the sense that they can always win, but it is going to consume X amount of their resources. Like it should do, like relatively speaking, it should do 20% of their health in damage. It should use, like, you know, a lot of times kind of approaching that from the D&D Pathfinder paradigm where you've only got a limited number of spell slots per day, as opposed to the Earthdawn spell casting, which is a different design idea. But that the idea is that an encounter is going to use up a certain amount of resources. And that there is a false sense of balance that can come out from that. And I think that occasionally having fights that are against a little bit more difficult opponents, and especially as they get a little bit later in their careers, of having fights against opponents that are a lot easier, that they are able to handle particularly well, to bring those in once in a while as a way of showing the players how far they have come in terms of their character development and whatnot.
Yeah.
Obviously, it gets to the point where, like, if you've got a group of, you know, if you've got a group of 5 or 6 7th circle characters, throwing, you know, a mass of first circle, you know, equivalent creatures at them is largely just an exercise in die rolling. You know, so at that point, you may want to change things up either by using masks, which we will talk about in more depth another time, or making things interesting tactically, or changing things up by having some smaller creatures along with larger ones. But yeah, like having a situation where they are going up against something that might have posed them a challenge early in their career, and now they come back a little bit later and they are
that was easy.
more powerful. And it is suddenly, you know, quite a bit easier.
Yeah. I always like, every once in a while, I like throwing something at them that I know they can't handle to see if they are smart enough to disengage and run away.
Yeah.
Because every once in a while, I'm kind of like,
something
this might kill you, and I want to know how tenacious they are.
I have no problem with doing that. I think that is something that needs to be made aware up front. It's one of those things that you might not necessarily need to say it for a particular encounter, but as part of the, like, discussion for the campaign and the game.
Yeah.
That is, you know, I will occasionally have you go up against things again because of the idea that, all combat encounters should be a challenge, but not, you know, unless it's the end of the adventure boss fight kind of thing. You know, you're not generally expecting characters to die, and the thought that, you know, so consequently there are some players, depending on their experience with various games, might come into a situation saying, oh, well, I know that they, you know, that we're not this isn't the boss fight, so we're not really at risk of dying. First off, the step system and the exploding dice make it possible that freak results can happen, which is why it's always not a good idea.
Yes.
It's always a good idea to have a death cheat charm or a last chance stab or something like that, just because. But, you know, so there's that. But there's, you know, if you're going to have a situation where you as the game master might be providing opposition or have things that are not meant to be, are not obstacles to be taken on solely by brute force. That there might need to be some cleverness or thought or whatever that goes around it. That is something that you probably want to make clear as part of the session 0 campaign planning kind of situation where, you know, I will occasionally have things that you will run into that you probably will not be able to handle in a fair fight. So you have to figure out how to make it an unfair fight or, you know, avoid it.
Avoid it or figure out where your advantage is.
Right. So, So that is something that I am absolutely have no problem with people doing that. I think it's a jerk move to not let your players know ahead of time that is something that is potentially on the table.
I'm a jerk then. No, I'm kidding. So, really, one last thing to point out in the Game Master's Guide is I think every single one of those encounters is novice or journeyman tier only. I think they only go up to like 7th or 8th circle maximum. The companion has the warden level encounters.
The companion, that was an intentional, for the most part.
Yes. I'm just here to plug a product
division
now.
choice.
So.
That there's, because, as I've mentioned before, and part of the work that Morgan did is that creatures generally are not intended to be like single monster boss fights. Like if you like if you've got a group of second circle characters, grab a 4th or 5th circle monster and kind of use that as a boss. But the problem that you run into again is because of the action economy that the creature is only going to be able to do so much. And with the number of debuffs and stuff like that and the chance of exploding rolls, they're going to maybe feel a little bit glass cannon-y. That they might do a good solid strike or two, but it doesn't take much to take them out. So, generally speaking, the creatures that are in the Game Master's Guide are sort of designed to be creatures that are inspiration for and appropriate challenges for characters of that level. And it's when we get into the companion and the much higher stuff that we get a little bit more. Of course, there's always dragons and horrors, which are also in the Game Master's Guide and are a little bit more
challenging.
A little bit more challenging.
Yeah.
But even those are kind of scaled, a little bit. So
yeah. So we hope actually this lays out some fun to have if you're looking at picking up any creatures as a game master, as a player character, but how to use them properly and effectively as a game master. But otherwise, I think this wraps up Blood Magic and monsters and creatures for now.
At least for now.
Until we get to the companion level later on. But other than that, folks, I want to thank you for making the time listening to us today. Ramble on and on and on. And Josh, thank you for making the time as well to keep the flame burning for all of us. If you have any questions about anything we've raised today on blood magic or monsters and creatures we can clarify for you and how to use them, feel free to email us at edsgpodcast@gmail.com.
And as always, check out the various other places that myself and other fans of the game can be found.
Enthusiasts. Yeah, because if you're not looking for us very much, sorry.
If you're not looking, you won't find us.
Exactly. If you're not trying hard. Anyway, I'm butchering the whole thing. Time to sign off. We're getting a little punchy. Gotta go. Thanks, folks. And it's time for you to go make your own legend.
Good night, everybody.